True resistance begins with people confronting pain and wanting to do something to change it. Bell hooks. Hi, I'm Jessica Disbrow, licensed social worker and founder of Higher Consciousness Healing. We're a small private practice in Lakewood, Colorado, which offers community building, free online education, individual and group therapy services, and we specialize in services for millennials. If you want more information about our practice, definitely check us out on the web at www.higherconsciousnesshealing.org. Right now you're watching our live video blog, which airs every Saturday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, where we talk about different mental health topics from a spiritual and scientific perspective. So welcome to the show. Thank you all for watching. Just a side note, I actually am pre-recording this show on my personal channel live, and it will be aired at 10 a.m. on Saturday. But I'm going to be at a pretty extensive trauma training all weekend, so I'll be missing you guys live and airing it on my personal channel instead. So just a heads up. For any of you watching in the audience live, please feel free to ask questions, comment during the show. I really like to make it more interactive, and it will also help our audience on my business page when it airs there. So I always think different perspectives are really helpful. All right, well, let's get into the show. Now, last week, we talked about considerations for a healthy, happy, and fulfilling life. And this week, we're going to talk about resistance, because what happens a lot of times when people go to make positive changes in their life, they'll notice that they're met with a lot of resistance from themselves. So I'm going to be talking about different signs of unconscious resistance, because we don't realize that we're doing things, or we think we're doing things for another reason, and it gets all confusing. So bringing some self-awareness to this issue is definitely key. All right, so how did we come up with this concept of unconscious resistance? Well, we got to thank psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He's the one who initially coined the term. And really, he was referring specifically to the resistance that he was seeing with his patients around therapy and the treatment process. And people being really identified with their pain and their illness in a way they weren't able to let go of due to secondary gains, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. Now, I've seen a lot of different kinds of resistance over the years, and I want to give an even broader perspective than just the therapeutic context, because I do think that we do have a tendency to resist a lot of change, especially positive change. And it's not, Freud, he really believed that it was because we have really fragile egos and we don't want to admit that we're bad or that there's something wrong with us, and that really deep down we feel not good enough. And while I think those are all really valid points, I do think that I see it as part of our evolution. Because when we were evolving and we're surviving, I think there's a lot of protective factors in not changing. Because we've survived this long doing what we're doing, so we must be doing something right. And so does, our evolution say, if I can procreate, then that's really good and I've done my work here. So that's really important to understand. Along with this is just the basic wiring of our brain, and it is neuroplastic, and we can make changes and leaps in our brain, but making those first steps is going to be the hardest when we start approaching this deeper work. So I think there's other factors at play here besides my fragile ego. I don't want to admit that I'm wrong, and I don't want to admit that there's things that I don't fully understand about myself. So just taking it a little bit broader, it's just some basic survival mechanisms at play. What are some of the signs of unconscious resistance? How do we recognize it in ourselves? Number one is avoidance. So a really great example of this is if you do decide to move forward with therapy and you miss your first therapy appointment because you didn't actually follow through with putting it in your calendar, and then you're really busy at work and you miss the appointment. That's a really good sign of unconscious resistance. Missing appointments, forgetting. Like you might have a conversation with someone and it was kind of intense and it brought up some things for you, and then you forget about it. And then the conversation comes up again and it's like, what? We had this conversation before? And the friend or partner's like, yeah, we did, like just a week ago. So again, we're kind of avoiding some of these deeper things that we don't really want to fully see and acknowledge in ourselves, because then we'd have to work hard to change it. So we kind of just have these inherent coping mechanisms that we don't even have full awareness around. Other forms of avoidance, we make excuses not to do things, procrastinate, put it off, all that jazz. Number 2, I see this a lot. People get distracted. Like their brain will literally be like, I can't listen to this right now, and be like, boop, onto something else. And that could happen during therapy, could happen during a really educational podcast that might be setting some stuff off for you and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can deal with that yet. It could be during a talk with a significant other. Lots of times that we kind of get distracted when really we could be getting really valuable information to help us move towards that positive change. Number 3, we make excuses. We make up a reason why we can't do something, but deep down, like there's part of us that knows that it's an excuse. And a really great way to kind of test this is if you say it out loud, especially to someone else, and there's just something in your stomach, somewhere in your core that's like, there's just something that's not right about this. Because there's so many reasons that we can make up to not get the help we need, to not make those, health changes that we need to make, to not go to the gym. It's like a really good example, like, oh, I'm too tired. It's like, well, if you got like 7 to 8 hours of sleep, maybe you should go, So let's not make up excuses for ourselves. And also realize that we all need help and that we actually are very interdependent. Now, I'm not talking about codependence, which can be really dysfunctional, but we're all interdependent. Just like we need air to breathe, we really do rely on each other and need each other's help. So try to avoid making excuses, especially when you know deep down that it's an excuse. And number 4 is a really interesting psychological phenomenon called projection. And projection is basically when you've really denied whatever your problem is, and then you find yourself getting hung up about it in somebody else. So a great example of this would be someone who sees their friend eating a lot of fast food and a lot of like sugary substances, and they're like, you really shouldn't be doing that. Like, I'm really concerned about your health. And they kind of go off on them. When really the person is actually doing similar things, maybe not eating junk food in that way, but maybe they're eating a lot of really sugary smoothies that they're like, well, it's fruit and it has, honey or agave, but really they're actually having way more sugar than they need. And so instead of recognizing that, they see it in someone else and then they get upset with that person. So projection. Number 5, when we blame others and don't take full responsibility. And this is a really easy one because, as I've said in other episodes, it's so easy to play the victim and it's so easy to put that blame on others. Especially a great example is our parents. Like, you raised me this way, it's not my fault. And really what needs to happen is we need to take full ownership of our actions and behaviors in the moment and really work to change the things that we don't like about ourselves. Because it's just that early programming. Like, we all go through a lot of different experiences that shape our brain and our body in a particular way. And that's just the journey we're all on, you know? But at the end of the day, we have to take responsibility for ourselves and move past that, or else things are just like not really a good place for us. You know, it really doesn't work out long term. Number 6, self-sabotage. So things like forgetting to set your alarm for work, parking on the wrong side of the street, even though you know that part of you knows that you're going to get a ticket, or maybe even towed because you're trying to avoid something else, maybe work or maybe some sort of family thing, whatever the case may be. Leaving your phone on silent when you're expecting a call from someone that you feel like might be kind of stressful. These are all signs of unconscious resistance. I'm sure you can fill in the blanks for other self-sabotage things, but just some examples there. And number 7, this is the last one I'm going to be talking about today, is identification with pain and illness. So as I mentioned, Freud really saw this a lot with his patients, and he attributed it to having secondary gains. So if you're in pain or you're bedridden, whatever the case may be, you're getting a lot of attention because of that. So, you know, things might feel easier for you because you have this illness or this pain. And I'm going to add something additional to this because, again, I don't think it's quite that simple. I actually believe that it's kind of our ego making an identity out of pain and out of suffering, out of whatever your illness is, and really getting wrapped up in that. Because our ego, as I've said in other episodes, it doesn't really exist because it's just kind of this wiring of the brain, and it's really confusing because in our mind, like, a lot of us think that we're our thoughts and we think that we're our feelings, but really we're something much deeper. We're our soul, really. But the ego, the brain, doesn't really know or understand this and can't really conceptualize this very well. And so it's constantly looking for something to identify with, to build an identity out of, because it doesn't really fully understand what's going on, just because of our evolution. So the ego makes an identity out of suffering. And I personally know, like, I've been there. I did that for many, many years. And I felt like there was not anything on the other side of that. Like, if I wasn't suffering in pain and victimhood, then who was I? And it really took me a big shift to get out of that frame of thinking. So it's complicated, very complicated stuff. All right, so the solution to all of this is to build self-awareness around our unconscious resistance, especially if you are looking to make positive change in your life and you find yourself forgetting appointments or being late or leaving your phone on silent and you're like, gosh, I just am such a mess. What is with this? A lot of times we resist the things that are going to bring us the most change. So just something to be aware of. You know, it's fine. Everybody does it. We're doing it on an unconscious level. You know, it's hard to make those changes if we've never made them before. And it feels really scary and intimidating for a variety of reasons. And, you know, there is truth to what Freud said about our fragile egos. Some of us don't want to admit just how bad things are to ourselves, never mind to other people. So it's all good. We're all on our own path and learning different things at different times as we need to. So building that self-awareness is great. I cover that in episodes 11 and 12. If you do want to go back to some of my previous episodes, 11 is on emotional regression. And did I say regression or repression? I always mix those two up, my bad. But it's when we repress things that we're not dealing with emotionally. And number 12 is about building self-awareness in the present moment, which is really key. Awesome. Well, thank you all for watching. If you have any questions or comments, now would definitely be the time for those of you viewing in the audience. Next week, I'm going to be talking about ego defenses, some really common ones that come up for pretty much, I mean, it's just very human of us, and specifically referencing Anna Freud's work. So she was actually the daughter of Freud, Sigmund Freud, and she made some pretty good contributions to the field of psychology as well. So I'm going to be diving into that next week. All right, I don't see any other questions or comments, so I'm going to peace out. I hope you all have a lovely weekend and take care.